My girlfriend spent 2 years rewriting reality to make me the villain every time I stood up for myself. When she finally slipped up in front of both our families, nobody could save her from her own words. The recording is still on my phone. I listen to it sometimes, not because I enjoy it, because on the days when I start second-guessing myself again, when my brain starts whispering that maybe I really was the problem, I press play and I hear her say it in her own voice. Clear as day, no room for interpretation. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Derek. I'm 31 now. When this whole thing started, I was 28 and I thought I'd found the woman I was going to marry. Her name was Jenna. We met at a friend's housewarming party in the summer, one of those backyard cookout things where everyone's a little sunburned and a little too friendly after a few drinks. She was standing by the cooler arguing with someone about whether hot dogs count as sandwiches. She was funny, sharp, had this way of making everyone around her feel like they were in on the joke. I liked her immediately. We talked for maybe 2 hours that night. She was a communications coordinator for a nonprofit. She was passionate about social issues. She read a lot. She had opinions and she wasn't afraid to share them. I found that attractive. I grew up in a house where my mom never said what she actually thought, and I'd always told myself I wanted a partner who would speak her mind. Be careful what you wish for, right? We started dating. The first 3 or 4 months were genuinely good. We'd cook dinner together, go on long walks, stay up late talking about our childhoods and our fears and all the stuff you talk about when you're falling for someone. She told me about her difficult relationship with her dad. I told her about losing my older brother in a car accident when I was 19. We were building something. At least that's what I believed. The first shift happened around month 5. It was small, so small I barely registered it. We were at a restaurant and the waiter messed up my order. I flagged him down politely and asked him to fix it. Nothing aggressive. I said something like, "Hey man, I think this is the wrong dish. Could you swap it out when you get a chance?" Normal stuff. After the waiter left, Jenna gave me this look, like I'd done something embarrassing. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Do what? Ask for the right food. You could have just eaten it. It's not that serious." I laughed it off, told her I wasn't going to pay for a meal I didn't order. She dropped it, but there was this tension for the rest of dinner. Like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. Looking back, that was the first one. The first time she tried to sand down a corner of my personality because it didn't fit the shape she wanted me to be. Over the next few months, it became a pattern. If I disagreed with her in front of friends, she'd go quiet and later tell me I was dominating the conversation. If I made a decision without consulting her first, even something minor like choosing a restaurant, she'd say I was being controlling. If I held a boundary, any boundary, she had a word for it. Toxic, aggressive, fragile. The thing is, she never yelled. She never threw things or called me names outright. She had this calm, almost clinical way of reframing everything. She'd use language that sounded like it came straight from a therapy podcast. She'd say things like, "I need you to examine why you feel the need to assert dominance in this situation." Or, "Your refusal to compromise is rooted in patriarchal conditioning." And I bought it. God help me, I bought it for a long time. Because here's what nobody tells you about this kind of manipulation. When someone uses the vocabulary of self-improvement and social awareness to tear you down, you don't recognize it as abuse. You think you're being educated. You think you're growing. You think the discomfort you feel is the discomfort of becoming a better person. I started apologizing for everything, for having preferences, for expressing frustration, for taking up space in my own relationship. I'd catch myself rehearsing what I was going to say before I said it, running it through a filter of, "Will this upset Jenna?" before the words ever left my mouth. My sister Mel was the first person to say something. Mel is 3 years younger than me, but she's always been the sharper one. She's a nurse, works in the ICU, deals with life and death every day. She doesn't have patience for pretense. We were at our parents' house for Sunday dinner, maybe 8 months into my relationship with Jenna. Jenna wasn't there that night. Mel and I were doing dishes and she just looked at me and said, "You're different." "Different how?" "Smaller," she said, "like you're trying to take up less room." I told her she was imagining things. She didn't push it, but she gave me this look. The kind of look you give someone when you know they're lying and you're choosing to let them figure it out on their own. Over the following months, Mel met Jenna a handful of times. She was always polite, but I could tell she was watching, studying. Mel has this thing where she gets really quiet around people she doesn't trust. She smiles and nods, but her eyes are doing something else entirely. After one dinner, where Jenna had spent 20 minutes explaining to my parents why traditional gender roles were inherently oppressive, while simultaneously telling me to clear the table and get her a refill, Mel pulled me aside. "Do you hear yourself around her?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "You asked her permission to tell a story about your own life, Derek. You looked at her before you spoke, like you were checking if it was allowed." I got defensive, told her Jenna and I just had good communication, that I was being respectful. "That's not respect," Mel said. "That's obedience." I didn't talk to Mel for 2 weeks after that conversation. Jenna noticed and asked what happened. When I told her, she said Mel was projecting her own insecurities onto our relationship. She said Mel probably couldn't handle seeing her brother in a partnership with a strong woman. She used the phrase internalized misogyny. She was talking about my sister, the woman who works 12-hour shifts keeping people alive, the woman who raised money to build a community garden in her neighborhood. She reduced Mel to a stereotype because Mel had the nerve to question her. But I nodded along, because by that point, nodding along was the only way to keep the peace. The real breaking point started building around the 1.5-year mark. Jenna had gotten more bold. She wasn't just correcting me in private anymore. She was doing it in public, in front of friends, in front of strangers. We were at a bar with a group of people one night, and one of her friends made a comment about how her boyfriend had surprised her with flowers. I said something about how I'd done something similar for Jenna the week before, bought her favorite orchids on a random Tuesday. Jenna laughed, not a warm laugh, a dismissive one. "That's a performative gesture," she said. "It's not the same as actually doing the emotional labor of being present." Everyone at the table went quiet. Her friend looked uncomfortable. I just sat there feeling like I'd been slapped with a textbook. Later that night, I tried to talk to her about it. I said it hurt to have something I did out of love turned into a punchline. She told me I was centering my feelings instead of listening to hers. She said my need for validation was exhausting. She said if I couldn't handle honest feedback, maybe I wasn't ready for an adult relationship. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling and genuinely wondering if she was right. That's the thing about sustained gaslighting. You don't just start doubting specific events. You start doubting your ability to perceive reality at all. But something was starting to crack. Somewhere underneath all the self-doubt, there was a part of me that remembered who I was before Jenna. A guy who spoke his mind. A guy who wasn't afraid to disagree. A guy who didn't need to check someone else's face before deciding whether his own feelings were valid. The crack got wider about a month later. We were at my apartment and I was watching a basketball game. Jenna was on the couch on her laptop. She asked me to turn the volume down because she was working on something. I said sure, grabbed the remote, turned it down a bit. 10 minutes later, she asked me to turn it down more. I did. 10 minutes after that, she asked me to just turn it off entirely. I said no, not rudely, just, "I'm watching the game, Jenna. I've turned it down twice. You could go to the other room if you need quiet." She stared at me like I'd just threatened her. "Wow," she said, "you'd rather watch a game than support me. I'm not going to turn off the TV in my own apartment because you decided to work in the living room when there's a desk in the bedroom. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You refuse to make space for me. You always have to be in control." Something snapped, not violently, not dramatically, just a quiet internal click, like a lock finally turning after years of trying the wrong key. "Jenna, I turned the volume down twice. I offered you an alternative. That's not control. That's a person with reasonable boundaries." She didn't have a response ready for that. I could see her cycling through her usual toolkit, looking for the right label to slap on what I'd just said. When she couldn't find one fast enough, she defaulted to her nuclear option. "You need to be less masculine," she said. "Seriously, the way you cling to these power dynamics is exactly why men are the problem." I just looked at her, and for the first time in almost 2 years, I saw her clearly. Not the smart, passionate, progressive woman I'd fallen for. A person who had been systematically dismantling my self-worth and calling it growth. A person who weaponized the language of equality to create the most unequal relationship I'd ever been in. I didn't say anything else that night. She eventually went to the bedroom. I slept on the couch. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened, which was another one of her patterns. She'd blow up, tear me down, and then float into the next day like the conversation had been deleted from history. But this time, I remembered, and I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Over the next few weeks, I quietly started documenting things, not in a calculating way, more in a survival way. I'd make notes in my phone after arguments. I'd write down what she said versus what actually happened. I started to see the pattern in black and white. Every single conflict followed the same script. She'd make an unreasonable demand. I'd push back gently. She'd reframe my pushback as aggression or toxicity. I'd apologize. She'd accept the apology magnanimously